Before we get started, please like and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from, and you can support the channel by clicking thanks or joining. My name is Daniel Harper, and until last New Year's Eve, I believed fireworks were harmless symbols of celebration, bright colors, loud cheers, a clean dividing line between the past and whatever hope people wanted to pretend the future held. I used to think the sky was empty, just a dark canvas waiting for light. I was wrong. The year ended in a small coastal town in northern Oregon, the kind of place where fog clings to the streets like a living thing and the ocean never truly sleeps. I had returned after 15 years away, summoned by the slow death of my father, and a house that refused to be sold until someone faced it. The locals called the place Driftwood Point. To me, it was where childhood memories went to rot. New Year's Eve arrived cold and windless. The town prepared the way it always did, with sanctioned fireworks launched from the cliffs overlooking the water. Families gathered along the shoreline. Couples held hands, children laughed, unaware of how fragile the boundary between the living and the unseen really was. I stood alone near the old lighthouse, my coat pulled tight, watching people gather below. My phone buzzed with unread messages from friends in Portland, invitations to parties I had declined. I told them I needed closure. The truth was simpler. I felt watched here, the same way I had as a child, like the sky itself was aware of me. The lighthouse had been decommissioned years ago, but it still dominated the cliff. Its glass eye was dark, reflecting nothing. I remembered standing there with my father when I was 8, his hand heavy on my shoulder, his voice low as he told me never to look too long at the night sky during the fireworks. I never understood why. At exactly 11:45, the town lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd, broken only by the waves crashing far below. The first firework screamed upward, a sharp, metallic sound that sliced through the air. It exploded in red. The crowd cheered. Then it happened again. Blue, gold, green, familiar patterns blooming and dying in seconds. I relaxed despite myself, letting the rhythm pull me in. Maybe this year would end quietly after all. Then the 5th firework detonated. The shape was wrong. Instead of scattering into abstract sparks, the light held together for a fraction too long. The glow twisted, stretched, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it formed something unmistakably human. A face. I felt my breath catch. The features were faint, etched in smoke and light. But they were there, hollow eyes, an open mouth, frozen in a silent scream. The face dissolved as quickly as it appeared, replaced by drifting ash. Someone laughed behind me, a drunken shout. No one else seemed to notice. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of stress and memory, but my hands were shaking. The next firework rose. It burst into white. Another face. This one was clearer, older, male. The outline of a beard I recognized before my mind could stop me. My father. The crowd roared with approval, unaware they were applauding the dead. I staggered back, nearly losing my footing on the damp grass. My heart hammered so hard, I thought it might tear free. I scanned the sky desperately as the face faded, searching for some rational explanation. Fireworks were programmed, controlled. They did not do this. A woman nearby turned to her companion and frowned. "Did you see that?" she asked. Relief surged through me. I wasn't alone. "What?" the man replied, distracted by his phone. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing." The fireworks continued. Each explosion revealed another face. A child with wide, terrified eyes. A woman with her lips sewn shut. A man missing half his skull. They hovered for seconds, long enough for my mind to register every detail, before dissolving into smoke that drifted toward the ocean. I realized with growing horror that the faces were not random. They were looking down at us. The crowd began to shift uneasily. Conversations faltered. Cheers died mid-breath. People noticed now, their denial cracking under the weight of repetition. "What kind of show is this?" someone shouted. The sky answered with another face. This one so clear it felt obscene. The eyes rolled slowly, scanning the crowd. Before locking onto me, I knew that face. It was mine, not as I was now, but as I would be. Older, gaunt, eyes sunken with terror. The mouth moved. It spoke my name. No sound reached the ground, but I heard it anyway, vibrating inside my skull like a struck bell. "Daniel," I screamed. Around me, others screamed too. Panic rippled through the crowd as people finally understood that something was terribly wrong. Children cried. Adults ran, trampling blankets and coolers as they fled the shoreline. The fireworks did not stop. They accelerated. Faces multiplied, overlapping, filling the sky until there was no darkness left between them. The clouds reflected their glow, turning the entire horizon into a writhing mass of human expressions. Fear, pain, rage, recognition. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head as memories I did not own flooded my mind, drowning, burning, falling from great heights. Every death felt personal, intimate, as if the sky itself were confessing. Through the chaos, a single thought cut through my terror. My father had known. The lighthouse. I forced myself to stand and ran toward it, as another firework erupted, revealing a face twisted in hatred that followed my movement across the ground. The lighthouse door groaned open under my shoulder, and I slammed it shut behind me, plunging into darkness. Outside, the sky screamed. I did not know it then, but the fireworks were not showing us the dead. They were reminding us who was next, and the night was far from over. I stayed inside the lighthouse for a long time, pressed against the cold stone wall, listening to the sky tear itself apart. Each explosion outside felt closer than the last, as if the fireworks were no longer climbing upward, but descending, peeling the air layer by layer to reach me. The screams from the shoreline faded, replaced by a suffocating silence, broken only by distant echoes and the steady pounding of my own heart. When the fireworks finally stopped, the quiet felt wrong, not peaceful, expectant. I stepped toward the narrow window and looked out. Smoke blanketed the town like a funeral shroud, glowing faintly from dying embers in the sky. The crowd was gone. Cars sat abandoned with doors hanging open. Blankets and shoes littered the grass below the cliffs, silent evidence of how quickly celebration had turned into flight. I told myself to leave, to run while I still could. Instead, I climbed the spiral stairs. The lighthouse interior smelled of rust and old seawater. Each step groaned beneath my weight, the sound echoing upward as if someone else were climbing ahead of me. My father had brought me here countless times when I was young, always stopping me before the top. Some things are not meant to be seen from above, he used to say. At the lantern room, I froze. The glass panels were no longer dark. A pale light pulsed within the lighthouse, slow and rhythmic. Like breathing, the old lamp should have been disconnected from power years ago, yet it glowed with a sickly white intensity that made my teeth ache. As I approached, the light flared. Faces appeared on the glass, not reflections, impressions pressed from the other side, as if the sky itself had folded inward and pinned them there. Men, women, children, their mouths moved silently, shaping words I could not hear. I recognized more than I wanted to. Mrs. Caldwell from down the street. She had vanished during a storm when I was 12. The fisherman who drowned when his boat capsized. A teenage boy who stepped in front of a train one winter night. Every unsolved disappearance the town had buried rose up to greet me. They were all staring past me, toward the stairs. A footstep creaked below. I spun around, heart hammering. "Hello!" My voice cracked against the stone. No answer. The steps continued, slow and deliberate. I backed away until my shoulders hit the glass. The faces behind me leaned closer, their expressions sharpening with anticipation. The footsteps stopped just beyond the doorway. Then a familiar voice spoke. "Danny, my father." He stepped into the lantern room, looking exactly as he had the last time I saw him alive. Same gray jacket, same tired eyes, no sign of illness, no hospital smell, just him, solid and real. Relief surged through me so fast it hurt. "You should not be here," he said gently. I laughed, the sound hysterical. "You died. I watched you die." He shook his head. "No," I finished. The light brightened, and the faces on the glass turned toward him with reverence. I realized then that none of them were blinking. "You knew," I whispered, "about the fireworks, about the sky." He nodded. "This town sits on a thin place. The dead pass close every year, but on New Year's Eve, the barrier weakens. The fireworks tear holes where they explode. They let things through. Why now?" I demanded. "Why show themselves?" His expression hardened. "Because the living have forgotten them, and because the debt is due." The word echoed inside my skull. Debt. I thought of the memories that had flooded my mind outside. Deaths that were not mine. Lives ending violently, unfairly. What do they want? My father stepped closer. The air around him felt cold, heavy. To be seen, to be remembered, and to be replaced. The lighthouse shook. Outside, the sky flared again. Not fireworks this time, but something deeper. A steady glow that pulsed like a massive heartbeat. Through the glass, I saw faces forming without explosions, emerging directly from the clouds. The dead were no longer waiting for invitations. They cannot cross on their own, my father said. They need witnesses, anchors. My stomach twisted. You were one of them. Yes, he replied quietly. For years, the realization hit me with crushing force. Every New Year's Eve, he had stayed sober. Every year, he had brought me to the lighthouse. Every year, he had watched the sky with dread. He had been protecting me or preparing me. I won't do it. I said, I won't help them. A crack split the glass behind me. One of the faces pushed harder, its features distorting as if pressed through water. The others followed, the lantern room filling with muffled impacts. You already are, my father said. You saw them. They know you. That makes you a door. The door burst open below. A rush of cold air spiraled up the stairs, carrying whispers that clawed at my thoughts. Names, dates, promises, threats. The dead were coming inside. My father placed a hand on my shoulder. It felt real, warm. There is a way to slow it, he said, but it will cost you. What? You must stay. Take my place. Guard the sky on this night. Every year, I stared at him, understanding dawning like a slow sunrise of horror. And if I refuse, the glass shattered. Hands made of smoke and light reached through. Grasping blindly, the lantern room filled with wailing as the dead forced themselves into shape, their faces stretching toward flesh. My father looked at me with something like sorrow. Then they will choose for you. I ran down the stairs, past grasping shadows, past voices that knew my secrets. The lighthouse screamed as the dead poured in, and above it all, the sky burned brighter. Behind me, my father called my name one last time. I did not stop, not yet. But I knew the night was only beginning. I did not stop running until my lungs burned and my legs felt hollow. I burst out of the lighthouse and down the narrow path toward town, slipping on wet gravel, the ocean roaring to my left like a living warning. Behind me, the lighthouse glowed, as if a second sun had ignited inside it, pale and accusing. The sky was no longer dark. It pulsed with a low white light, spreading slowly across the clouds, revealing faces that no longer needed explosions to exist. They drifted in layers, overlapping and dissolving, reforming again with terrible patience. Some screamed, some smiled, some simply watched. They followed me, not with movement, but with attention. I reached the edge of town and collapsed behind an overturned bench, gasping for air. The streets were deserted. Storefront windows reflected the glowing sky, turning every pane of glass into a mirror filled with the dead. I forced myself to look away, but their presence pressed in from all sides, heavy and intimate. A car engine coughed nearby. I flinched, heart racing, then crawled toward the sound. A pickup truck idled crookedly in the middle of the road, its driver door wide open. A man sat slumped over the steering wheel, unmoving. "Hey," I whispered, then louder. "Hey." No response. Approached slowly. The man's eyes were open, glassy, fixed on the windshield. His mouth hung slack as if he had tried to scream and failed. There were no wounds, no blood, just a look of profound recognition frozen on his face. He had seen something meant for him. The radio crackled to life. Static gave way to a voice, faint and distorted. If you can hear this, get inside. Stay away from windows. Do not look at the sky. The message looped, breaking apart between words. It sounded official. Emergency broadcast. I climbed into the truck and shut the door, hands shaking. The cab felt too small, the windows too large. Even without looking up, I felt the weight of the sky pressing down, waiting for me to acknowledge it again. I drove. The town blurred past, familiar streets rendered alien under the unnatural glow. I passed houses with doors flung open, lights flickering inside. In one living room, a family sat frozen on a couch, all facing the same window, their faces slack with awe and terror. At the edge of town, I nearly collided with a police cruiser parked sideways across the road. The officer inside was alive. He crouched behind his open door, weapon drawn, eyes wild. "Stop!" he shouted. "Do not move." I raised my hands and stepped out slowly. "The lighthouse," I said. "It is coming from the lighthouse." His expression twisted. "No, it is coming from everywhere." He gestured upward without looking. "They are calling people by name." My partner ran when he heard his daughter's voice in the clouds. A distant scream cut through the air, short and final. The officer swallowed hard. "We need shelter, something underground." The words sent a chill through me. The old storm tunnels. They ran beneath the town, built decades ago to divert floodwater from the cliffs. Most entrances had been sealed after a collapse, but I knew one that was still accessible. "My father used to take me there," I said, when the sky scared him. The officer stared at me, then nodded. "Lead the way." We moved fast, sticking to alleys, avoiding open spaces. The glow intensified as the night wore on, the faces sharpening into clarity that felt obscene. I heard whispers brushing my ears, voices testing the shape of my name. "Daniel, Daniel." I clenched my teeth and kept walking. The tunnel entrance lay hidden behind an abandoned cannery. We pried the rusted grate open and descended into darkness just as the sky flared brighter than ever before. The moment we stepped underground, the pressure eased. The air was damp and stale, but blessedly quiet. The officer exhaled a shaky laugh. "It cannot reach us here." I was not so sure. We followed the tunnel deeper, our flashlights cutting narrow cones through the dark. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling. Old warning signs lay half submerged in mud. Then the whispers returned, not from above, from the walls. Faces formed in the damp concrete, emerging slowly like memories pressed into stone. Their mouths opened and closed in perfect silence, eyes tracking us as we passed. The officer fired his weapon. The sound was deafening in the confined space. The bullet struck the wall and vanished into the forming face, which rippled and smoothed itself as if nothing had happened. He stared at his gun, shaking. "They are everywhere," he whispered. The tunnel sloped downward, and I felt a familiar dread settling into my bones. We were not hiding from the dead. We were descending toward them. The tunnel opened into a large chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. In the center stood a ring of old metal pylons, blackened and rusted, arranged in a deliberate circle. My father's words echoed in my mind. "Thin place." The glow seeped through cracks in the ceiling, illuminating the chamber in ghostly light. Faces gathered along the walls, watching, waiting. The officer backed away. "What is this place?" I swallowed. "An anchor." The air grew colder. The whispers swelled into a chorus, overlapping voices forming a single intent. I understood then that the lighthouse was not the source. It was a warning. This chamber was the wound. The faces leaned closer, their features sharpening with hunger. I felt the pull of them, the same force that had drawn my father back year after year, somewhere above us. Fireworks screamed again, though none had been launched. The sky was reopening, and down here, something ancient stirred, eager to be remembered. I realized with sick certainty that running had only brought me closer to the truth, and the truth was waiting for me to choose. The chamber breathed. That was the first thought that lodged itself in my mind as I stood beneath the rusted pylons. The air pulsed in slow, deliberate waves, each one carrying a faint vibration through the soles of my boots and up my spine. It felt less like standing in a room and more like standing inside something alive. The police officer took a step back and nearly slipped in the mud. "This place is wrong," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We should leave now." I wanted to agree. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to run back toward the tunnels and the fragile illusion of safety they offered. But the whispers had changed. They were no longer pleading or curious. They were expectant. The faces along the walls sharpened, features pulling free of the concrete as if the stone were soft clay. Their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my vision blur. "They brought you," a voice said, layered and uneven. "You always come back." I shook my head. "I did not bring anything." The pylons hummed. A memory surfaced uninvited. My father standing at the edge of this chamber years ago, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow with understanding. I remembered him telling me this was a place where time moved where past and future pressed against the present until nothing could breathe. The officer raised his flashlight, sweeping it across the circle. Symbols were carved into the floor between the pylons, nearly erased by years of water and neglect. Dates, names, dozens of them layered atop one another. New Year's Eve. Every inscription ended the same way, with a signature. "I recognize these," I said slowly. "They are not victims. They are guardians." The officer looked at me, horror dawning. "You mean people volunteered for this?" "No," I replied. They stayed. The chamber reacted to my words. The whispers swell, filling the space with a sound like wind rushing through a graveyard of open mouths. The dead were not bound here by chains or rituals. They were bound by choice. Of us, something shifted. Dust rained from the ceiling as a deep vibration rolled through the chamber. The glow intensified, bleeding through cracks in the rock, outlining the pylons in blinding white. The sky was pushing down. A face emerged from the ceiling itself, massive and distorted. Its features stretched across stone and shadow, its mouth open, and this time the sound came through. "Daniel Harper," the officer screamed. I dropped to my knees, clutching my ears, but the voice cut through bone and thought alike. Images flooded my mind. My childhood, my departure from the town, every New Year's Eve. I had spent trying not to think about Driftwood Point. You were marked. The voice continued. You were raised within the cycle. No, I gasped. I left. You returned. The pylons flared. Light shot upward in narrow columns, punching through the ceiling and into the sky above. For a brief, terrifying instant, I saw the entire structure from outside. The town perched atop a glowing wound that connected earth and cloud. The officer bolted. He ran toward the tunnel, boots splashing through shallow water, breath ragged with panic. For a heartbeat, I thought he might make it. The wall moved. A face tore itself free of the concrete, stretching into a shape with arms and legs formed of smoke and light. It grabbed the officer around the chest and pulled him screaming into the wall, his body dissolving as if absorbed by wet stone. Silence fell. I was alone. The whispers softened, almost gentle now. The faces withdrew slightly, watching me with something like approval. I understood then why my father had stayed. Not because he wanted to, because someone had to. The chamber needed a witness, an anchor with blood and memory. Someone who could stand at the center and be seen by both sides. The fireworks above screamed again, their light punching through the ceiling cracks. Faces blossomed in the sky, brighter and clearer than before. The cycle was accelerating. I stood, legs shaking, and stepped into the center of the ring. The air thickened instantly, pressing against my chest. The pylons hummed louder, their vibrations syncing with my heartbeat. Images flickered around me, projections of past New Year's Eves. My father standing here, younger, terrified, others before him. Men and women from different decades, all sharing the same expression of grim resolve. They had all stood where I stood now. You can leave, the voices said in unison, but the sky will follow. I looked up through the cracked ceiling, at the endless faces crowding the clouds. I thought of the families frozen in their living rooms, the officer who had trusted me, my father, who had tried to spare me this fate. There was no running from a wound this deep. What happens if I stay? I asked. The chamber answered with a surge of light and memory. Years would pass. The town would forget. Fireworks would be launched again and again, tearing small holes in the sky that I would be forced to mend, one night at a time. I would be seen. I would be remembered, and I would not be allowed to die. The realization crushed me. I need time, I said, just until morning. The whispers paused. Then, slowly, the faces receded. The glow dimmed to a tolerable ache. The pressure eased, though it did not vanish. You have until dawn, the voices agreed. After that, the choice will be made. The chamber fell silent. Above me, the sky still glowed, restless and hungry. I knew this reprieve was temporary. I had until sunrise to decide whether I would become the next guardian of the wound, or let the sky take whoever it wanted instead. Dawn felt impossibly far away. I left the chamber in silence, moving back through the tunnels with slow, measured steps, as if any sudden motion might wake something that was pretending to sleep. The walls no longer whispered, but I could feel their attention sliding after me, patient and certain. The dead knew where I was going. They always did. When I emerged from the tunnel behind the cannery, the town looked unchanged at first glance. The streets were still. The buildings stood where they always had, but the light was wrong. The sky glowed with a dull, bruised white, as if morning were struggling to exist behind layers of something heavier. I checked my watch just after 2 in the morning. Hours left. I moved through the town, keeping my head down, avoiding windows. Every reflective surface felt dangerous now. Storefront glass, car mirrors, even puddles left by the evening fog shimmered with faint impressions, as if faces were trying to remember how to form. A siren wailed in the distance, then cut off abruptly. I ducked into my childhood home, the door still stuck the way it always had, swollen by decades of damp air. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old wood, layered with something colder. The power was out. Moonless light crept through the curtains, painting the furniture in gray shapes that felt unfamiliar. I leaned against the wall and let myself breathe. This was where my father had lived, with the knowledge, where he had prepared himself year after year. I needed answers he had never given me. I went to his study. The desk drawer resisted at first, then slid open with a tired groan. Inside lay a stack of notebooks bound with twine. Each one was labeled with a year. New Year's Eve. My hands trembled as I untied the first bundle. The entries were spare and precise. Observations, timings, sketches of the sky, notes about which faces appeared and which did not. He recorded patterns I had never noticed. Certain families, certain streets, certain names that returned again and again. The dead were not random. They were connected. I flipped to the last notebook. The final entry was dated the year I left town. Daniel left today. My father had written, "If this place has any mercy left, it will let him forget." My throat tightened. There was another note tucked beneath the last page, written in a shakier hand. "If he comes back, it means the sky has chosen him. I am sorry." A sound upstairs made me freeze. Footsteps, slow, careful. I extinguished my flashlight and listened. The steps stopped at the top of the stairs. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a familiar voice called my name. Daniel, my mother. She had died when I was 10. A car accident on a foggy road. I had not heard her voice since the funeral. Every instinct screamed at me not to answer. The steps resumed, descending one by one. I backed into the study, heart pounding, and watched the doorway. She appeared in the hall light, whole and perfect, not wounded, not spectral, just my mother, wearing the blue sweater she used to love. "You look tired," she said softly. "You should rest." Tears burned my eyes. "You are not real." She smiled sadly. "Neither is the sky anymore." She reached out, stopping just short of touching me. I felt a pull toward her, a gravity that threatened to undo every promise I had made to myself. "They need you to stay," she said. "Your father tried to carry it alone. It broke him. What happens if I leave?" I asked. Her expression faltered. For the first time, I saw the strain beneath her features, like cracks in glass. "Then they will take who they can. Children, strangers, anyone who looks up." The house shuddered. Outside, the glow intensified, faces pressed against the windows, their outlines bleeding through the curtains. The whispers returned, threading through my thoughts with intimate familiarity. "Daniel, Daniel." I covered my ears, but the sound came from inside. "I just want this to stop," I whispered. My mother nodded. Then you must finish what he started. She faded slowly, dissolving into drifting light that seeped into the walls and floor. The house fell silent again. I sank into my father's chair, shaking. The notebooks lay open before me, their pages filled with years of quiet sacrifice. He had lived his life in fragments, measuring time by how long he could keep the sky closed. I looked at the clock, 3:30. If I was going to make a choice, I needed to see what would happen if I did nothing. I stepped outside. The town felt exposed now, stripped of pretense. Faces filled the sky in dense layers, staring down with hunger and recognition. Some matched the names in the notebooks. Others were new. The dead were recruiting. A child stepped into the street ahead of me. She could not have been more than 8 years old. She looked up, eyes wide, mesmerized by the light. A face peeled free of the clouds above her, stretching downward, mirroring her features. I ran. I tackled her to the ground just as the light flared, shielding her eyes with my hands. The face screamed soundlessly and recoiled, dissolving back into the clouds. The child sobbed, clutching my coat. Something inside me broke. I understood then what my father had understood. This was not about choice. It was about responsibility. I helped the child to her feet and led her toward shelter, the sky seething above us. Dawn was still hours away, but my decision had already been made. I took the child to the nearest shelter I could find, an old grocery store with no windows on its lower level and thick concrete walls that muffled the sound of the sky. She clung to my hand the entire way, trembling, her eyes squeezed shut as if darkness alone could keep the faces away. I left her with a group of survivors huddled in the storage room, their expressions hollow with shock and disbelief. None of them asked where I was going when I turned back toward the door. They already knew. The streets were no longer empty. People moved cautiously now, heads down, hands over ears, guided by instinct and fear. Some ran, some prayed, some simply sat on curbs, staring at the ground as if refusing to look up might make the night pass faster. It would not. The sky was growing impatient. Faces pressed lower with each passing minute, their features distorting as they stretched toward the town. The glow intensified, bleaching color from everything it touched. Driftwood Point looked like a photograph left too long in the sun. I made my way back toward the tunnels. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself resisted my movement. Whispers brushed against my thoughts, no longer coaxing but commanding. Return, return. I remembered my father's notebooks, the patterns, the timing, the way the sky reacted when someone acknowledged it fully. It needed consent, not willing consent, just recognition. At the cannery, the tunnel entrance yawned open, dark and waiting. I descended without hesitation this time, my fear replaced by a grim clarity. The walls seemed to lean closer as I passed, their surfaces rippling with half-formed faces that retreated when I refused to look at them. The chamber greeted me with a surge of light. The pylons were fully illuminated now, humming with power that vibrated through my bones. The carved names on the floor glowed faintly, as if newly etched. The dead had not been idle. I stepped into the circle. The air compressed around me instantly, squeezing my lungs until every breath felt borrowed. Images flooded my vision unbidden. The town decades ago, the first guardian standing alone beneath an unfamiliar sky. Fireworks rising not in celebration but in fear. The cycle had begun long before I was born. "I am here," I said aloud. The words echoed unnaturally, overlapping with themselves until they became a chorus. The sky answered. Light poured down through the cracks in the ceiling, forming a column that engulfed me. Faces appeared within it, swirling and colliding, their expressions raw and intimate. I recognized neighbors, strangers, people who had not yet died. The future pressed against the present. My father's voice emerged from the noise, strained but clear. "Listen to me. You cannot hold them back alone." "I know," I replied, teeth clenched. "You never did either." The pressure intensified, forcing me to my knees. Pain flared behind my eyes as memories that were not mine forced their way in. I felt every year my father had spent here, every New Year's Eve measured not in celebration but survival. "You can shape the breach," he said, "guide where they look." Understanding struck like a blow. The fireworks were not just tearing holes, they were lenses. If I could focus them, narrow their attention, I could buy time, not forever, but long enough to keep the town alive. I reached for the nearest pylon. The metal burned cold against my palm, sending a shock through my arm and into my chest. The chamber screamed, a sound that rattled my teeth and shook loose dust from the ceiling. Faces surged toward me, furious now. I planted my feet and held on. The sky resisted, pushing back with crushing force. My vision tunneled. Blood trickled from my nose, warm and startling against the cold air. "I see you," I said through clenched teeth, "but you will not see them." The words mattered. The pressure shifted. Above us, the glow flickered. The faces wavered, their focus blurring as if something had blocked their view. The whispers turned shrill. Enraged, the pylons flared brighter, their hum rising to a painful pitch. Light arced between them, forming a crude lattice that anchored the column above me. For a moment, the sky recoiled. I collapsed to the floor, gasping, my body shaking uncontrollably. The chamber dimmed slightly, the immediate threat easing. It worked, only partially. The dead regrouped quickly, their faces reforming with renewed determination. The pressure returned, heavier this time, more deliberate. My father's voice softened. "That is all you can do tonight." I laughed weakly. "That is not enough." "It never is," he replied, "but it is something." The glow above steadied into a dull, constant ache rather than a blinding surge. I felt the sky watching me with focused hostility now, its attention narrowed to a single point. Me. I had become the distraction. I dragged myself to my feet, every muscle screaming. Dawn was still hours away, but the town might survive until then. If I could. The chamber trembled as the sky pressed down again, testing my resolve. I straightened my shoulders and faced the light. If this was my role, then I would play it fully. The sky could have me, but it would not have them. Time stopped behaving normally. After I became the focus of the sky, minutes stretched into hours, then snapped back into seconds without warning. My body remained in the chamber, standing between the pylons, but my mind drifted in and out of moments that did not belong to me. I saw the town as it had been long before Driftwood Point had a name. Wooden huts along the shore, fires instead of fireworks, faces in the sky even then, faint and curious, watching humans learn how to celebrate endings. The dead had always been here. They simply learned patience. The pressure never left. It only shifted, probing for weakness. When my knees buckled, the pylons flared brighter, forcing me upright again. The chamber would not allow collapse. Not yet. You cannot sleep, my father's voice warned softly. If you let go, they will look past you. I nodded, though my vision swam. How long did you last? There was a pause, a hesitation that told me the truth before he spoke. Not long enough. Pain crept into my limbs, a deep ache that settled into muscle and bone. I realized then that the guardians did not age normally. Time did not move forward for them. It layered. Each year added weight rather than distance. I felt it happening already. Above me, the sky churned. The fireworks had stopped hours ago, but their echoes lingered in the clouds like scars. Faces drifted in slow orbits now, no longer frantic. They were studying me, memorizing the shape of my resistance. One face detached from the mass. It descended slowly, lowering itself until it hovered just above the ceiling crack. Its features were unfamiliar, older than any I recognized. Its eyes deep and reflective. "We remember you," it said, its voice layered with many others. "You remember us." Images surged forward. People I had never met, deaths that had happened before I was born. I staggered, nearly losing my grip on the pylon. "I do not owe you my life," I growled. "No," the face replied calmly. "You owe us your attention." The distinction mattered. The pressure spiked, forcing a scream from my throat. The pylons vibrated violently, their light flickering as the sky tested how far it could push without breaking the anchor entirely. Somewhere far above, a new sound joined the night. Sirens. The town was waking. Rescue crews, National Guard, anyone who could be mobilized in the face of something no one could explain. Their arrival stirred the sky, drawing curious ripples through the mass of faces. "They will look," the voices warned. "They always look." I understood the danger instantly. If too many people looked up at once, the sky would no longer need me. It would have thousands of anchors. I clenched my teeth and pulled harder against the pylons, focusing every thought on narrowing the breach. The light column tightened, drawing inward like a closing fist. The sky screamed. Faces warped and stretched as their attention snapped back toward me, furious and offended. The pressure nearly crushed my chest, but the town above dimmed slightly, the glow retreating from the streets. "It worked." "Barely. You are weakening," my father said, concern threading his voice. "I know," I replied, "but they are learning too." The chamber shook as something massive shifted beyond the ceiling. The dead were not just watching anymore. They were coordinating. A second face descended, then a third. They arranged themselves in a crude circle. mirroring the pylons below. "Our council, you cannot hold this alone," they said together. "That is why we always choose more." The words sent ice through my veins. "You mean replacements?" I whispered. "Yes." The sky flickered, and I saw flashes of other towns, other coastlines, other celebrations lighting up the night, fireworks blooming like infected stars. The cycle was spreading. My father's voice grew urgent. "Listen carefully. There is a reason the guardians were always local, because the sky needs memory." I said slowly. "Personal memory." "Yes, and you are running out." I felt it then, gaps forming in my thoughts, small things slipping away, the sound of my mother's laugh, the smell of the ocean on summer mornings, the face of the child I had saved earlier. Panic surged. "Then I will forget myself," I said, "and still hold them." Silence followed. Even the dead hesitated at that. "That is the price," the council admitted, "but we do not prefer it." "Too bad," I said. I let go of a memory on purpose. Just one. It hurt more than any physical pain so far. A tearing sensation, like losing a limb I had not realized I depended on. The pylons flared violently, feeding on the sacrifice. The sky recoiled. The glow above the town dimmed noticeably, plunging streets into relative darkness. Sirens faltered, then stopped as responders hesitated, suddenly uncertain of what they were seeing. My vision blurred, but I stayed standing. "What did you do?" my father whispered. I smiled weakly. I paid in advance. The faces thrashed, their expressions twisting with something close to fear. They pressed down harder, but the narrowed breach resisted. Anchored by loss, they could not immediately replace. Dawn was approaching. I could feel it, a subtle shift in the sky's rhythm, an impatience creeping into the dead. They did not like daylight. The council withdrew slightly, regrouping within the clouds. The pressure eased just enough for me to breathe. "You cannot do that forever," they warned. "No," I agreed, just long enough. As the chamber settled into an uneasy balance, I realized the truth of my role. I was not just a guardian, I was a barricade made of forgetting, and every memory I surrendered bought the town another minute of night. I hoped it would be enough. The first thing I forgot was small. It took me several minutes to realize something was missing at all. A hollow space opened in my thoughts, subtle and quiet, like a word resting on the tip of my tongue that refused to surface. I searched for it instinctively, then stopped myself. Searching only made the sky lean closer. I focused on breathing instead, in and out. The chamber remained stable, the pylons humming with a restrained, controlled violence. Above me, the mass of faces churned restlessly, frustrated by the narrowed breach. They wanted more from me. They always would. "You are changing," my father said gently. His voice felt farther away now, thinner, as if it had to cross a longer distance to reach me. "I know," I replied, though the certainty behind the words felt weaker than before. Time slipped again. I could not tell how long I stood there, trading pieces of myself for moments of calm. The sky pressed. I resisted. Each exchange left me lighter, less anchored, as if the gravity that once tied me to the world was slowly being undone. Something new entered the chamber. A vibration I had not felt before rippled through the pylons, disrupting their rhythm. The light wavered, flickering like a failing pulse. The town is interfering. The voices murmured from above. They are trying to understand. Images flashed in my mind. Scientists, military command centers, screens filled with satellite feeds and frantic analysis. The glow in the sky was visible far beyond Driftwood Point now, a pale scar stretching across the clouds. They will make it worse, I whispered. Yes, the sky agreed. Understanding brought attention. Attention created openings. I tightened my grip on the pylons, ignoring the pain tearing through my arms. Then I will give you something else. The sky paused. Even the dead seemed curious. I reached inward, past the easy memories, past the ones already thinning at the edges. I searched for something deeper, something foundational. I found my name, Daniel Harper. It sat at the center of me, heavy and familiar. I hesitated for the first time since entering the chamber. Without it, what would remain to anchor me here? My father's voice sharpened with alarm. Do not do that. If I do not, I said quietly, they will. I let go. The sensation defied language. My thoughts fractured, scattering like glass under pressure. For an instant, I did not know where I was or why I stood surrounded by light and screaming faces. The pylons erupted. Light surged outward, slamming into the sky with explosive force. Above, the faces recoiled violently, their shapes tearing and reforming as the breach constricted further than it ever had before. The glow over the town dimmed sharply. For the first time all night, the sky blinked. I sagged against the pylon, gasping. My heartbeat sounded distant, unfamiliar. Words felt heavier now, as if I had to choose them carefully from a shrinking pool. My father was shouting something, but it took several seconds for the meaning to reach me. You have no name now, he said, grief threading his voice. They will not be able to let you go. I laughed weakly. Then they will have to keep looking at me. The chamber trembled as the dead regrouped, furious and wounded. Their pressure returned, but it was uneven now, disorganized. They circled, searching for leverage they no longer easily possessed. The council reformed in the clouds, its voices layered with unease. You are unraveling, they warned. You will not survive the dawn. I do not need to, I replied, surprised by the calm in my tone. Another memory slipped away, unbidden. I felt it leave like a breath I had not known I was holding. Panic flickered, then faded. Fear required context. Without a name, without a future to imagine, the sky's threats felt distant, abstract. The pressure hurt, but it no longer frightened me. That is dangerous, my father said softly. For them, the sky pushed harder, testing the altered anchor. The pylons flared in response, feeding on my instability like a fuel source. Light arced wildly, carving harsh shadows across the chamber walls. Above ground, the town darkened further. Emergency lights flickered on, weak and uncertain. People emerged cautiously from shelters, unsure whether the nightmare was ending or changing shape. The dead noticed. Their attention wavered, torn between me and the thousands of minds beginning to look up again. I seized the moment. I focused not on holding them back, but on pulling them toward me. Every fragment of awareness I had left sharpened into a single point of invitation. Look here, the sky screamed, Faces surged inward, colliding within the narrowed breach, fighting for position. The glow intensified around the chamber, isolating it completely from the world above. The pylons groaned, metal warping under impossible strain. "You are becoming one of us," the council accused. "No," I thought, the words barely forming. "I am becoming less." The distinction mattered. Dawn approached. I felt it as a subtle cooling, a shift in the sky's hunger. The dead recoiled instinctively from the approaching light, their movements growing frantic. They hated endings. The chamber shook violently as the first hint of morning bled through the cracks above. Thin and gray, the pressure spiked once more, a final attempt to break me before the sun arrived. I stood my ground, whatever I was now. It was enough as the sky writhed above me, uncertain and constrained. I realized something with distant clarity. I might not remember who I had been, but I would remember what I was doing. And for this night, that would have to be enough. Dawn did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like a cautious animal testing unfamiliar ground. The gray light filtering through the cracks above the chamber felt thin and fragile, almost afraid of what it might find. The sky recoiled from it, faces dissolving into softer shapes, their edges blurring as if daylight weakened their ability to hold form. I felt the change immediately. The pressure eased in uneven pulses, releasing and tightening again as the dead struggled to adapt. The pylons cooled beneath my hands, their violent hum settling into a low, exhausted thrum. For the first time since I entered the chamber, I was allowed to slump forward without being forced upright. I did not know how long I had been standing. Time no longer meant what it once had. My thoughts drifted without clear edges. Memories floated past like debris on dark water. Some I recognized, others felt familiar without context. Emotions detached from events I could no longer place. My father's voice sounded distant, distorted. "You did it! You bought them the night." I tried to answer, but the words tangled before reaching my mouth. Speaking required effort now, as if language itself were something I had to relearn. Above us, the council fractured. Faces withdrew into the thinning clouds, their attention splintering under the growing light. Some clung stubbornly to the breach, pressing closer in defiance, while others fled upward, dissolving into pale mist. "They are retreating," my father said. "They always do at sunrise." Relief should have followed. It did not. The dead were not defeated. They were wounded, and wounded things learned. The chamber shuddered as the sky made one final attempt to reclaim its whole. A surge of pressure slammed down, driving me to one knee. Pain exploded behind my eyes as something tore loose inside my head. A name, not mine, someone else's. It slipped through me like a hook, dragging fragments of foreign memory in its wake. A woman standing on a different shoreline. A countdown shouted in a language I did not understand. Fireworks rising over a city far away. The cycle was not confined to Driftwood Point anymore. I screamed as the pylon flared, severing the connection with brutal force. the intrusion vanished, leaving behind a hollow ache and the echo of a life that was not mine. "You see now," my father said quietly, "they are learning to reach beyond the local anchor." The implications settled heavily over me. Even if I held here, others would face the sky elsewhere. The pylons dimmed further as the chamber stabilized. The light above retreated into a dull scar stretched thin across the clouds, visible but no longer dominant. The night was ending. The town above began to stir in earnest. I sensed it without seeing it. Doors opening, people stepping cautiously into the streets, murmured voices rising in confusion and disbelief. The dead noticed too, their attention tugged upward, restless, frustrated by the narrowing window. They pushed once more, weaker than before, testing whether I would resist again. I did, not with strength, with absence. There was less of me now for them to grasp. The pressure slid off in awkward waves, unable to find purchase. The council's voices frayed into overlapping fragments, arguments dissolving into noise. "You cannot be empty forever," they warned. "You will fade. That is the point," I thought. Daylight strengthened. The sky's hunger receded, replaced by a sullen, watchful patience. Faces thinned to faint impressions barely visible against the brightening clouds. The breach closed to a narrow seam. The pylons went dark. I collapsed. The stone floor felt impossibly solid beneath me. Gravity returned with sudden cruelty, pinning me in place as exhaustion flooded every remaining part of my body. I lay there, breathing shallowly, staring up at a ceiling that no longer glowed. Silence settled over the chamber, real silence. My father's presence felt closer now. He knelt beside me, though I could not see him clearly. "You should not be alive," he said softly. "None of us ever were." After the first night, I tried to focus on his face. It slipped away. "Is it over?" "For now," he replied. "It always is." The words carried no comfort. The town would repair itself. Stories would blur. Official explanations would fill the gaps where memory failed. People would celebrate again next year, and the sky would watch. "You cannot leave the chamber," my father said. "Not fully. Even now, they know where you are." A tremor ran through me, not of fear, but of recognition. The chamber no longer felt like a place. It felt like a boundary I had become part of. "Will I remember this night?" I asked. He hesitated. "Enough." Above us, the first true sunlight broke through the clouds, washing the town in pale gold. The scar in the sky faded to something most people would dismiss as lingering smoke. The dead withdrew completely, but I felt them still, waiting. As rescue crews reached the edges of the chamber and voices echoed faintly down the tunnels, I realized the truth of my survival. I had not saved the town. I had delayed it. The sky had learned something new, and so had I. This was no longer a story with an ending. It was a calendar, and the next page was already turning. I woke to daylight that did not feel real. The chamber was quiet, stripped of its glow, its pylons reduced to coal. Inert metal, dust hung motionless in the air, illuminated by thin beams of sunlight filtering through the fractured ceiling. For a moment, I believed everything had been a dream. Then I tried to stand. Pain tore through my body in sharp, unfamiliar places. My muscles trembled as if they no longer remembered their purpose. I collapsed back onto the stone floor, gasping, my breath echoing too loudly in the confined space. Voices drifted down the tunnel, human voices. Rescue workers moved cautiously into the chamber, their boots scraping against stone, their flashlights sweeping the walls in tight, controlled arcs. They froze when they saw me. "He is alive," someone said, disbelief thick in their tone. Hands lifted me gently, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Questions followed, one after another, but they slid past me without leaving marks. Words reached my ears, but meaning lagged behind. They carried me out as we emerged into the open air. Sunlight struck my face with unexpected force. The town looked ordinary again, too ordinary. Buildings stood intact. Streets were clear. People gathered in small clusters, whispering, pointing, staring at the sky as if expecting it to flare again. Nothing happened. Above us, the clouds drifted lazily, pale and empty. Relief rippled through the crowd. I felt none of it. The ambulance ride blurred into fragments. Sirens, a medic's calm voice, the smell of antiseptic. I answered questions automatically, relying on instincts rather than memory. My name. I hesitated, a beat too long. The medic frowned but moved on. At the hospital, doctors ran tests they could not explain. Scans showed nothing wrong with my brain, yet I struggled to recall basic details. Faces slipped away moments after I saw them. Conversations dissolved as soon as they ended. They called it acute dissociative trauma. They were wrong. The sky had taken collateral. Days passed. The town resumed its routines with unsettling speed. News reports framed the night as a rare atmospheric phenomenon, combined with mass hysteria, fireworks malfunctioning, light refraction, panic feeding panic. People accepted it eagerly. Memorials appeared briefly for those who had died during the chaos, then quietly vanished as if lingering grief felt inconvenient. I was discharged a week later. They advised rest, therapy, distance from stress. No one suggested leaving town. The house waited for me, unchanged, its quiet rooms heavy with things I no longer fully recognized. I moved through it carefully, like a guest in someone else's life. At night, I dreamed, not of faces, of calendars, dates blurred together, pages turning endlessly, each marked with the same circle in red, December 31st. I began to notice gaps, entire afternoons missing. Objects moved without my recollection. Notes written in my own handwriting that I did not remember leaving myself. Do not look up. Stay underground when it starts. Trust the pain. The messages frightened me more than the night itself. I returned to the tunnels, not because I wanted to, because my body knew the way. The chamber remained quiet, but it no longer felt dormant. Standing there filled me with a sense of pressure, like leaning against a door someone else was pushing from the other side. I was still connected. That night, I heard fireworks, not nearby, far away. A distant echo carried on the air, faint but unmistakable. I froze, heart racing, and looked toward the horizon. The clouds glowed briefly. Just for a second, a shape formed, not a face. A mark. The same thin scar I had seen at dawn, now faintly mirrored across the sky in another place. My father's voice whispered from somewhere I could not pinpoint. It has begun to synchronize. The word chilled me. What does that mean? I asked. That the calendar is no longer local. He replied, they are learning to keep time together. The implications unfurled slowly, horribly. Multiple cities, multiple celebrations, fireworks rising in unison, tearing coordinated holes across the sky, too many to hold alone. I pressed my palms against the cold stone of the chamber wall, fighting the rising dread. Then this cannot continue. No, he agreed, but it will. I understood then that survival had only moved the problem forward. I was no longer a shield. I was a signal. The sky had marked me, not just as a boundary, but as a reference point, a living timestamp tied to the moment it learned how to expand. The pain in my head returned suddenly, sharp and punishing. Images flashed behind my eyes, cities I had never visited. Countdowns shouted in dozens of languages. The cycle was aligning. I staggered back, breath ragged. Above ground, life went on. Below it, the calendar turned, and I knew with a clarity that cut through my fading memories that next New Year's Eve would not be confined to one town. It would be global, and if I was still alive when it arrived, the sky would come looking for me again. The weeks after New Year blurred together, stitched by routines I did not remember choosing. I learned quickly that my mind worked best when I did not question it. Asking why I knew where to go or how I understood what needed to be done caused headaches sharp enough to make me vomit, so I followed instinct. Instinct had carried me through the night. It would have to carry me through whatever came next. The first call arrived in February. A woman from California spoke in careful tones, introducing herself as a researcher attached to a federal task group. She did not explain how she found me. She did not need to. We are seeing anomalies, she said, sky-related, recurring, always near celebrations. I closed my eyes. The pain behind them flared briefly, then settled. Fireworks, I said. There was a pause. Yes, they flew me out 2 days later. From the air, the world looked deceptively calm. Cities glimmered at night like scattered constellations. I felt the pull immediately, a faint pressure tugging at my chest whenever the plane crossed a time zone. The calendar inside me shifted, aligning itself with local clocks I could not see. In the briefing room, screens displayed satellite footage of glowing scars in clouds across multiple continents. Thin lines at first, barely noticeable. Growing, they appear only for seconds, the woman said, but they recur on specific dates, always tied to countdowns. I nodded slowly. They are learning rhythm. The task group stared at me as if I had spoken another language. Perhaps I had. They brought me to the first sight that night, a coastal city preparing for a festival unrelated to New Year. Lanterns floated over water. Music echoed through narrow streets. Fireworks were scheduled at midnight. I felt the sky tense hours before the show began. Cancel it, I said. They hesitated. Permits, crowds, money. At 11:58, the first scar appeared, a faint seam in the clouds, pulsing in time with the countdown. Faces pressed behind it, indistinct but unmistakable. Panic spread faster this time. I stepped forward without thinking, my feet carrying me to the center of the plaza. As fireworks ignited, despite shouted orders, color exploded overhead, each burst widening the seam. The pressure slammed into me. I dropped to one knee, gasping, the familiar weight settling over my thoughts. The sky recognized me. Good! I reached outward, searching for the pylons that were no longer there. The ground answered instead. Stone, water, metal. I grabbed onto everything at once, anchoring myself to the city through raw sensation. I see you, I thought, pushing the words upward. Look at me. The seam tightened, faces twisted in frustration as their focus narrowed. The crowd fell silent, an instinctive hush rippling outward as attention slid away from the sky. Fireworks fizzled out one by one. The seam sealed. I collapsed fully this time. They carried me away as sirens wailed, the festival dissolving into confusion and fear. Official statements followed within hours. Technical malfunction, safety concerns. The truth sank quietly into the task group. I was not a solution. I was a tool. Over the following months, they moved me from city to city. Rio, Sydney, Tokyo, Paris, always ahead of major celebrations, always racing the calendar. Each intervention cost me something. A language I once spoke vanished entirely. The memory of a favorite meal left no trace beyond an empty craving. Faces of people I worked alongside blurred moments after I turned away. I stopped asking their names. My father appeared less often now. When he did, he seemed faded, stretched thin by distance or disuse. They are adapting, he warned during one rare moment of clarity. They are no longer waiting for you. I felt it too. The sky no longer lunged clumsily toward fireworks. It probed gently, testing edges, slipping attention through moments of distraction. A cheer here, a flash there. They were becoming subtle. During an intervention in Berlin, I felt something snap. The seam closed, as it always did, but the pressure did not recede fully. A residual ache lingered, spreading through my skull like a bruise. That night, I dreamed of a countdown that never reached zero. Numbers looped endlessly, refusing to end. When I woke, I knew something had changed. The calendar inside me had lost alignment. The next scar appeared early, not tied to any celebration. Just before dawn, faces pressed through pale clouds above a sleeping city, confused and curious. The task group scrambled, unprepared, and for the first time, I was late. The seam widened. I arrived as the sky began to open in earnest, panic already rippling through streets below. I forced myself into position, anchoring clumsily, fighting the misaligned rhythm tearing at my thoughts. It worked, but barely. Afterward, I lay shaking on cold pavement, vision dimming. The woman knelt beside me, fear plain on her face. "What happens when you cannot keep up?" she asked. I searched for the answer and found only a blank space where certainty should have been. "I do not know," I admitted. Above us, the sky closed reluctantly, like an eye that did not want to sleep. I realized then that the calendar was no longer something I carried. It was something that was moving ahead of me, and I was running out of time. time, they stopped asking me to explain. By spring, the task group understood that explanations cost time we did not have. Briefings shortened, questions became directives. Planes waited on tarmacs with engines running. Cities rotated through my life like stations on a track I could not leave. The calendar inside me drifted further out of sync. I felt it every morning before my eyes opened. A subtle wrongness, a lag between my heartbeat and the rhythm of the world. Sometimes the day felt ahead of me, sometimes behind, but rarely aligned. When alignment slipped too far, the sky reacted. The first failure happened in Mumbai. A religious festival had drawn millions into the streets. Fireworks were unofficial, unsanctioned, but inevitable. The task group tried to suppress them quietly. They missed one. At exactly 6:32 in the evening, a seam tore open above the city, wider than any I had seen since Driftwood Point. Faces surged through immediately, eager and coordinated. Panic spread like heat through a crowd too dense to move. I felt the pull from miles away. By the time the helicopter set me down on a rooftop, the sky was already feeding. Attention poured upward in waves as people screamed, pointed, prayed. I pushed back, harder than ever before. The anchoring hurt differently now, not sharp. Heavy, like lifting a collapsed building with bare hands. The city answered me with noise and vibration, millions of lives pressing through my nerves at once. The seam narrowed, too slowly. A face detached and descended farther than any before it. It hovered just above the rooftops, its features shifting between dozens of identities. They are learning to arrive early, it said calmly, and to stay. I screamed wordlessly and gave more than I could afford. The seam sealed. The city survived. I did not completely. Afterward, I lay on the rooftop, shaking uncontrollably as medics rushed toward me. The world fractured into overlapping versions, each slightly offset from the next. My hands looked unfamiliar. My reflection in a nearby window felt like a stranger studying me with concern. The woman from California knelt beside me. "What did it take?" she asked softly. I tried to answer. Nothing came. Entire categories of thought were gone. Not memories, but frameworks. The ability to imagine a future. The sense of belonging to a body that would persist. They flew me out that night. In transit, I began to dissociate entirely. Time skipped. Locations repeated. Faces blurred into interchangeable masks. The calendar inside me spun freely, unmoored from external clocks. When I slept, I dreamed of the sky without cities beneath it, just endless faces drifting through clouds, waiting for something to notice them. My father returned during one such dream, clearer than he had been in months. "You are burning too fast," he said. "I am doing what is needed," I replied, though the conviction felt thin. There was never meant to be only one. He said, "That was our mistake." Understanding dawned slowly. "You mean guardians?" I whispered. "Yes." Anchors spread across the calendar, sharing the weight. The idea terrified me more than the sky ever had. "I cannot ask that of anyone," I said. "You already are," he replied gently. "Every time you save a city, you teach the sky how to choose." I woke with tears on my face and no memory of why they were there. The next incident occurred without warning. No celebration, No countdown, a random night in June, a scar opened above a rural town with no history of fireworks or festivals. Faces emerged cautiously, as if testing a new rule. I arrived too late to prevent casualties. The task group did not tell me how many died. I saw enough in the aftermath to understand. The sky was no longer dependent on celebration. It was dependent on observation. Attention alone was sufficient. I stood at the edge of the town as dawn broke, watching the last faces fade. Something inside me hardened. "This will never end," I said. The woman nodded, eyes hollow. "Not with one of you." I looked at my hands. They trembled constantly now, even at rest. The pain behind my eyes had become a permanent resident. "We need more anchors," I said. The words felt heavy, dangerous. She swallowed. "How many?" I closed my eyes, feeling the calendar spin, mapping future nights of convergence. Enough that no single date matters anymore. Silence followed. They began preparations within hours. Volunteers were not requested. They were selected. People with unusual neurological profiles. Survivors of mass events. Those already partially out of phase with ordinary time. I met the first candidate in a quiet room beneath a research facility. He looked at me with open fear. "Will I die?" I searched for honesty and found only fragments. "Not the way you think," I said. He nodded slowly. "Will it help?" Yes, that was enough. As the program expanded, I felt the pressure ease slightly. The sky reacted with confusion, its attention scattering as new anchors came online. Seams still appeared, but they were smaller, less stable, angrier. "They are dividing the burden," the voices accused one night. "We do not approve. You will adapt," I replied, surprised to hear strength in my thoughts. They would. They always did. But for the first time since Driftwood Point, the calendar slowed. Just a little, and in that pause, I allowed myself a dangerous thought. Maybe the sky could be taught fear, and maybe I would not have to be the last one standing to do it. The first new anchor broke within a month. Her name was Emily Ross, 32 years old, a graduate student in cognitive science who had survived a stadium stampede years earlier without a scratch and never quite returned to normal time afterward. She understood what we were asking of her better than most. She lasted 27 days. I felt it when she failed. A sharp lurch tore through my thoughts, like a rope snapping under tension. Somewhere across the world, the calendar stuttered, skipped a beat, then lurched forward again. The sky reacted instantly, a ripple of attention surging toward the gap she left behind. We were too late to contain the fallout. A small city in South America lost power at midnight. When the lights went out, people looked up instinctively. A seam opened above the darkness. Brief but vicious. Faces poured through for less than a minute. That was enough. By the time reports reached us, the dead count was already being revised upward. I sat alone in a reinforced room beneath the facility, hands pressed flat against a metal table I barely recognized as such. Grief should have come first. Instead, guilt arrived. I had told her it would help. The others felt it too. The remaining anchors grew quiet, withdrawn, their attention turning inward as fear settled like a second shadow. I visited them one by one, offering words I no longer trusted. "You will not fail," I said. I did not know if that was true. The sky sensed the fracture in our confidence. Seams appeared more frequently in the days that followed, probing lightly at first, then with growing boldness. Not full breaches, tests. They were measuring us. "They are mapping your network," my father warned during a rare lucid moment. "You are nodes now. Break one, feel them all." He was right. Pain traveled strangely between us. When one anchor struggled, the rest felt a distant echo. Headaches, disorientation, sudden lapses in memory that did not belong to us individually. We were becoming a system, and systems failed in predictable ways. The task group responded with protocols, isolation periods, rotations, artificial darkness, limiting exposure to crowds and reflective surfaces. They treated anchors like volatile equipment rather than people. I did not correct them. That night, I dreamed of Emily. She stood beneath a sky without faces, looking relieved. When she spoke, her voice carried no accusation. "You did not lie," she said. "You just did not know." I woke with my cheeks wet and no memory of crying. The second failure was worse. He did not die. He simply walked away. An anchor in Eastern Europe disconnected himself deliberately during a moment of intense pressure. He tore out monitoring equipment and fled into a city square just as a seam was forming. Witnesses later reported that he looked calm, peaceful. When the sky opened fully, he stepped forward and looked up. The breach stabilized instantly. It did not close. The faces lingered longer than ever before, their attention locked in place by willing recognition. When authorities intervened, it was already too late. That city was lost. The task group stopped using the word volunteer after that. We were no longer building anchors. We were building barriers. I confronted the woman from California in a secure corridor lit by humming fluorescent panels. "You cannot force this," I said. "It requires consent, even broken consent." She met my gaze evenly. "And if consent is no longer available?" The answer hovered between us. Then something unexpected happened. The sky hesitated. Across the world, seams flickered without fully opening. Faces pressed forward, then withdrew, uncertain. The pattern was erratic, inconsistent. "They are confused," my father whispered, awe creeping into his tone. I felt it too. The loss of Emily had hurt us. The defection of the second anchor had strengthened the sky locally, but globally, something had shifted. Too many points, too many partial attentions. The sky had learned to synchronize, but now it was being desynchronized. I realized the truth with a jolt of clarity. Anchors were not meant to be stable. They were meant to fail. Each failure taught the sky something new, but each failure also introduced noise into its system. Contradictions, unreliable timing. We were infecting it with unpredictability. I gathered the remaining anchors in a secure underground chamber. Their faces were pale, their eyes ringed with exhaustion. "We are not going to stop this," I said, "but we can make it hurt." They listened. "Do not hold perfectly," I continued. Do not fail cleanly. When pressure comes, resist unevenly. Let memories slip at different rates. Force the sky to guess. Silence followed. Then one of them nodded. Another followed. The next breach attempt was chaotic. A seam opened above a coastal city at dusk, but its edges warped unpredictably. Faces flickered in and out of focus, unable to lock on. The pressure oscillated wildly, slamming into us in uneven waves. The breach collapsed on itself within seconds. The sky screamed, not in rage, in confusion. I staggered back, blood running freely from my nose, laughter bubbling up through the pain. It was working, not ending, but hurting. My father's voice trembled with something like pride. You are teaching it uncertainty. Good, I said weakly. It deserves to forget what comes next. The calendar inside me jerked, skipping forward, then back again. Dates overlapped. Countdowns stuttered. For the first time, the sky did not know when it was supposed to win. As I sank into a chair, vision dimming, I understood the cost. This path would burn through anchors faster. People would break, but the alternative was certainty, and certainty belonged to the sky. I wiped the blood from my face and stood again. If we were going to lose, we would not lose on schedule, and neither would it. Uncertainty spread faster than panic ever had. After the first collapsed breach, the sky changed its behavior completely. Seams no longer followed predictable lines or schedules. They flickered in short, violent bursts, opening and closing like reflexes rather than decisions. Faces appeared half-formed, distorted, sometimes upside down, as if the sky itself no longer trusted its own sense of direction. We had injured it, but injured things adapt. The anchors felt it first. Pressure no longer arrived as a single crushing weight. It came in erratic pulses, striking without warning, vanishing just as abruptly. One moment I would feel nothing. The next, my vision would explode into white static as the calendar inside me spasmed. Sleep became impossible. When I closed my eyes, dates bled together. Midnight overlapped with noon. Countdowns whispered in reverse. I learned to rest in fragments, 10 minutes at a time, never long enough to fall fully unconscious. The task group called it progress. They were wrong. This was escalation. Cities began reporting phenomena that did not fit previous patterns. No fireworks, no celebrations, just sudden moments when people felt compelled to look up, a collective itch at the back of the mind. That was all the sky needed. A seam would appear for a heartbeat. Faces would press forward just long enough to imprint terror. Then it would vanish, leaving behind confusion and injuries caused by panic rather than the breach itself. Fear was becoming the delivery system. We cannot predict these, the woman from California admitted during one emergency briefing. Dark circles carved deep lines beneath her eyes. They are exploiting attention spikes. Yes, I replied. They are letting humans open the door for them. The anchors were deteriorating. One developed severe aphasia overnight, language unraveling mid-sentence. Another lost the ability to recognize faces, including her own reflection. A third simply stopped responding, his consciousness locked somewhere unreachable. while his body remained alive. I felt each loss like a phantom limb. The network shuddered with every failure, redistributing strain unevenly. Sometimes the pressure slammed into me without warning, as if the sky were testing whether I could still bear being its primary reference. It could, barely. My father appeared more often now, though each manifestation seemed to cost him clarity. His edges blurred, his voice occasionally slipping out of sync with his lips. "You are winning time," he said once, "but time is not neutral." "I know," I replied. "It takes sides." He studied me with an expression I struggled to interpret. "It is choosing you less." The words struck harder than any pressure wave. "What does that mean?" "It means the sky is learning to ignore you." I felt it then, a subtle loosening, where once the sky snapped to attention when I focused. Now it hesitated. Sometimes it looked elsewhere first. Other anchors, crowds, entire cities. The sky was distributing its hunger. The first mass event after desynchronization was catastrophic. A sporting final drew millions of viewers worldwide. No fireworks, no countdown. Just synchronized attention focused on a single moment. The sky seized it. Seams opened simultaneously above 6 cities, tearing reality in jagged, uneven arcs. Faces poured through in fragments, too many to catalog. Their attention divided but overwhelming. We scrambled, anchors strained against impossible loads. 2 burned out completely within minutes, their minds collapsing into static. A 3rd screamed until her voice gave out, blood streaming from her eyes. I felt the sky slide past me, not resisting, choosing. By the time the broadcast cut to black, thousands were dead. The task group fell silent afterward. There were no explanations left to offer. In the aftermath, governments acted openly, celebrations were restricted, broadcast delays enforced, curfews imposed, entire populations told not to look up at certain hours. It did not help. Fear only sharpened attention. The sky fed on anticipation now as much as spectacle. I confronted the task group in a secure underground hall that smelled of ozone and fatigue. "We are approaching the limit of fragmentation," I said. "If this continues, anchors will fail faster than we can replace them." "And if we stop?" someone asked. I hesitated. Stopping meant certainty. The sky would regain rhythm, clean breaches, predictable victories. I shook my head. "Then we lose everything at once." Silence followed. Later, alone in the chamber beneath the facility, I felt the calendar convulse violently. Dates shattered, scattering like broken glass. I dropped to my knees, vomiting as pressure ripped through me. The sky was forcing a recalibration, not toward order, toward convergence. Faces appeared in my peripheral vision even with my eyes closed, murmuring a single concept layered with countless voices. Soon, they were done guessing. My father knelt beside me, his form flickering. "They will try to end the noise," he said. "One event, one moment, new year." I whispered, "Yes." The thought chilled me. A global convergence, a single synchronized countdown tearing open the sky everywhere at once. "There will be no anchors left after that," I said. "No," he agreed. "There will be no need for them." I forced myself to stand, every muscle screaming in protest. "Then we cannot let time reach that point cleanly," I said. The calendar inside me bucked wildly, resisting. For the first time since Driftwood Point, I felt genuine fear, not of dying, of what would happen if I survived. The sky was planning an ending, and endings were its favorite kind of celebration. Preparation for the final convergence did not look like panic. It looked like silence. Governments stopped issuing statements. Broadcast schedules went dark weeks ahead of time. Entire cities rehearsed living without countdowns, without clocks visible in public spaces, without anything that marked the passing of a year. It was the quietest December the world had ever known. The sky did not care. It pulsed steadily now, no longer erratic, no longer confused. The scars that once flickered unpredictably had aligned into a slow, deliberate pattern. Wherever midnight approached, the clouds thinned in anticipation. The calendar inside me screamed. Every date pulled at once, dragging my awareness across time zones in violent surges. I could feel the planet rotating beneath me like a living wound, each approaching midnight, a needle poised to pierce the sky. We had reached the point where strategy ended, only sacrifice remained. The remaining anchors gathered beneath the facility in a chamber reinforced far beyond anything we had used before. There were fewer than a dozen of us now. Faces I once knew had vanished from memory, leaving behind only impressions of pain and courage. No one spoke. We all felt it. This was not about holding anymore. This was about breaking the pattern completely. My father stood apart from the others, clearer than he had been in months. His presence carried weight again, as if the sky itself had been forced to acknowledge him. "There is one way left," he said. I nodded. To erase the reference. Yes, the words tasted like ash. As long as I existed as a temporal marker, the sky could synchronize against me. My survival had become a convenience for it, not a hindrance. I was the spine of the calendar. If I snapped, the structure would collapse. "You will not die," my father said carefully. Not immediately. That was worse. What will I become? He looked at me with infinite sadness. Unfixed. The plan was simple in concept and monstrous in execution. At the first global midnight, instead of resisting, I would open myself fully to the sky, not in recognition, but in dissolution. I would let every remaining memory, every fragment of identity, every temporal anchor unravel at once. No center, no reference, no calendar. The sky would have nothing to count against. The anchors understood the cost immediately. If I succeeded, they would be freed. If I failed, the sky would consume everything. One of them stepped forward. "We will hold as long as we can," she said. "To give you time." I did not thank her. Gratitude felt irrelevant at this scale. As midnight approached across the eastern hemisphere, the sky brightened with restrained excitement. Faces gathered in the clouds, layered and expectant, whispering in a language made of numbers. 10, 9. I moved to the center of the chamber, feeling the calendar stretch tight inside me like a wire pulled to its limit. My father placed a hand on my shoulder. For the first time in years, it felt solid. "You were never meant to carry this alone," he said. "I know," I replied. "That is why it ends with me." The first midnight struck. The pressure was immediate and absolute. The sky slammed into me from every direction at once, a tidal force of attention and hunger. I did not resist. I let go. Memories tore free in a single, cascading wave. Childhood, names, faces, fear, hope. All of it unraveled, dissolving into raw sensation without context. The pain was indescribable, not sharp, total. The anchors screamed as the network destabilized, their connections severing one by one. But beneath the chaos, I felt something else. Confusion. The sky hesitated, without a center to lock onto. The converging midnights began to slip out of phase. Countdowns overlapped incorrectly. Some jumped forward, others stalled. The sky tried to compensate. It failed. Scars opened and closed in rapid succession, unable to stabilize. Faces collided, blurred, tore themselves apart in frustration. I felt myself thinning, not dying, spreading. My awareness fractured across moments, no longer tied to a single point. I existed between seconds now, nowhere long enough to be claimed. The sky screamed, not in rage, in loss. One by one, the remaining midnights passed without catastrophe. Fireworks failed to ignite. Crowds hesitated, unsure why the moment felt wrong. By the time the last time zone crossed into the new year, the sky was dark, empty. The pressure vanished. I collapsed to the floor, or perhaps the floor rose to meet what was left of me. Silence followed, true silence. When awareness returned, it did so without context. No name, no past, just presence. The anchors were gone. The chamber was empty. Above me, daylight crept through unbroken clouds. The sky had lost its calendar, and I had lost everything else. Somewhere, the world celebrated quietly, unaware of what had almost ended, and I remained unfixed, watching a sky that no longer knew when to look back. Life continued after the silence. That was the first and most disturbing realization. The world did not pause to acknowledge what had almost happened. News cycles moved on. Governments quietly dismantled emergency structures. People complained about failed fireworks, canceled celebrations, and a new year that felt strangely empty. Only a few noticed the absence. I walked through cities without belonging to them. Crowds passed through me like weather, their conversations brushing my awareness without leaving marks. I did not age. I did not heal. I did not dream. Time ignored me. Hospitals recorded me as a John Doe who never deteriorated and never improved. Shelters logged my presence, then lost the paperwork. Cameras failed to capture my face clearly, footage blurring or corrupting whenever I remained too long in frame. I learned quickly not to stay anywhere. When I lingered, small things went wrong. Clocks skipped seconds, streetlights flickered out of rhythm, people paused mid-sentence, confused by a sense of forgetting what they were about to say. I was a remainder, a fraction left behind after division. The sky remained calm. Clouds drifted normally. Storms followed forecasts. Astronomers reported nothing unusual beyond minor data anomalies they blamed on equipment error. Officially, the crisis had never existed. But at night, when the world grew quiet, I felt it. Not hunger, Curiosity. The sky no longer searched for dates. It searched for patterns that refused to settle. It traced my movement indirectly through the disturbances I left behind. I avoided looking up, not out of fear, out of instinct. I traveled constantly. Subways, freight trains, highways where headlights stretched into endless lines. Movement diluted my presence, smearing me thin enough that reality could tolerate me. Still, echoes followed. In a small town in northern Canada, every clock stopped at exactly 3:17 in the morning while I slept beneath a bridge. In Tokyo, an entire district experienced simultaneous deja vu when I crossed an intersection during rush hour. In Madrid, a child pointed at me and said, "That man does not have a tomorrow." Her mother laughed nervously and pulled her away. I did not. I understood what the child meant. Tomorrow required continuity. I no longer had that. My father did not return. His absence felt heavier than his presence ever had. Whatever he had been tied to, whatever rules had allowed him to speak, had ended with the calendar. He was free or gone. I was not sure which was worse. Months passed, or years. I could not tell. Seasons changed around me like rotating sets. Snow gave way to heat, heat to rain, rain to frost. I remained the same, a constant error drifting through cycles I could no longer enter. Then the sky did something new. It waited. For the first time since Driftwood Point, there were no probes, no seams, no tests, just long stretches of normality so complete they felt artificial. The quiet stretched too far. I felt pressure building without direction, like breath held indefinitely. The sky was not defeated. It was observing, learning what the absence of a calendar did to the world and to me. In a coastal city preparing for a midsummer festival, I felt the warning too late. Fireworks were banned, no countdowns planned. Everything had been sanitized against attention. It did not matter. As the first flare rose accidentally from a private boat offshore, the sky twitched, not open, just aware. I froze, heart pounding for the first time in months. Pain lanced through my skull as reality tightened around me. I was still connected. The sky had not lost its anchor. It had lost its schedule, and I was the only irregularity left large enough to matter. I fled the city before nightfall, the sense of pursuit crawling across my skin. Clouds thickened behind me, stretching into shapes that dissolved when I turned to look. I ran until exhaustion meant nothing. When I finally stopped, hidden in a forest far from lights, I understood the truth I had been avoiding. Breaking the calendar had not ended the threat. It had changed the rules. As long as I existed, the sky had something to study, a reference point that refused to align. I was not a victory. I was a variable. The wind moved through the trees overhead, and for a brief moment, the clouds parted enough to reveal stars. They looked wrong, not hostile, patient. I felt the sky watching without eyes, measuring without counting, waiting for me to make a mistake. I pulled my coat tighter and disappeared deeper into the forest, knowing with cold certainty that the final outcome had only been delayed. Time had lost its shape. but it had not lost interest. I learned how the sky hunted without dates. It did not rush anymore. It did not test with seams or flashes of light. Instead, it followed patterns of absence, places where records failed, moments where memory slipped, people who could not be properly recalled. People like me. I stayed away from cities after that realization. Urban density amplified the distortions I caused. Too many clocks, too many observers, too many systems trying and failing to agree on where I fit. Rural places tolerated me better. I crossed deserts where heat erased footprints before they could form. Forests where paths shifted naturally. Oceans where nothing expected permanence. The world's forgotten spaces became my refuge. But refuge was not safety in a village that did not appear on any digital map. I felt the first deliberate move, not pressure, alignment. Every dog began barking at once. Birds lifted into the air as if pulled by a single string. The wind stopped. The sky had found a way to triangulate me without time. Through reaction, I fled before the clouds finished gathering, my presence smearing across the landscape like a dropped signal. Behind me, the sky adjusted, learning how fast I moved, how the world bent in response. It was no longer waiting. It was tracking. Sleep became dangerous. When I stayed still too long, reality attempted to settle around me. That was when the sky drew closest. I learned to rest in motion, walking until my legs gave out, riding freight trains without destination, letting exhaustion blur me enough to remain unfixed. Still, signs appeared. In Mongolia, herders told stories of a man who walked through storms without getting wet, leaving animals disoriented in his wake. In Patagonia, fishermen spoke of nights when the stars rearranged themselves around a single dark silhouette on the shore. Rumors travel faster than data, and the sky listened. The first confrontation after the silence happened in a canyon where radio signals died. I felt it before I saw it. The stone walls amplified the wrongness of my presence, echoing it upward. The clouds above twisted, not opening, folding. Faces emerged without light, etched into shadow, their expressions curious rather than hostile. "You are not scheduled," they said together. "I was never meant to be," I replied, surprised my thoughts still formed words. They descended slowly, the canyon darkening as their attention narrowed. Rocks vibrated. The ground hummed like a struck bell. "You removed the count," the sky said, "but you remain a measure." Understanding cut through me. As long as I existed as an anomaly, the sky could study deviation. It did not need dates anymore. It needed me. I ran. The canyon erupted behind me as gravity wavered. Stones lifted, then slammed back down. Shadows stretched in impossible directions, trying to pin me in place. I escaped only by falling. The river below accepted me without question. Cold and violent and blessedly indifferent, water erased my outline faster than air ever could. The faces recoiled, losing cohesion as the current carried me away. I surfaced miles downstream, gasping, shaking, but alive. Barely. I knew then that avoidance was no longer enough. The sky had adapted to absence. To win, I would have to become something else again, something smaller, something closer to nothing. I spent months experimenting. Starvation thinned me. Isolation dulled my thoughts. I avoided mirrors, avoided names, avoided habits, anything that defined repetition. I learned to think without sequence, to remember without narrative, to exist as a blur of sensation rather than a self. When I succeeded, the sky lost me for minutes at a time, then seconds, then hours. Each success came at a cost. Language frayed, emotions flattened. I could no longer tell if pain was physical or conceptual, but the sky hesitated when it could not find a pattern. That hesitation was hope. In a salt flat where the horizon erased direction, I felt the sky approach again, this time cautiously, carefully. It was afraid, not of destruction, of irrelevance. You cannot disappear completely, it whispered. Everything leaves a trace. I stood still, letting the wind strip sensation from my skin. Then I will become the smallest trace possible. The clouds above shuddered, not with anger, with uncertainty. I understood then that the final act would not be violent. It would be quiet. A reduction. The sky needed reference, even broken reference. If I could shrink beyond meaningful detection, it would lose the last thread connecting it to human attention. I began the process, letting go of response, of reaction, of identity, becoming less noticeable than background noise. Days passed without markers, or maybe seconds. When the sky searched, it found only static. When it listened, it heard nothing it could interpret. I felt myself thinning further, edges dissolving into the environment, not dying, diffusing. The last thing I sensed clearly was the stars. They no longer looked wrong. They looked bored. And then even that feeling faded. I do not know how long I remained in that state. I only know that when awareness returned, it did so faintly, gently, like a ripple on still water. The sky was quiet, not watching, not waiting. For the first time since Driftwood Point, it had nothing to follow, and I was almost nothing at all. When I returned to awareness, the world felt thinner, not quieter, not calmer, just reduced, as if someone had turned down the saturation on existence itself. Colors dulled, sounds arrived late, even gravity seemed negotiable, a suggestion rather than a rule. I was still here. That realization carried no relief. I existed as a residue, a faint disturbance in systems that preferred clean answers. People passed near me without seeing anything unusual, yet subtle inconsistencies followed in my wake. Automatic doors hesitated. Digital clocks skipped backward 1 second, then corrected themselves. The sky remained empty. No faces, no seams, no pressure. Its absence felt intentional. I understood then that the sky had not lost interest. It had lost certainty. I was no longer a measurable anomaly. I had become statistical noise, the kind scientists filtered out to make data usable. That made me difficult to track, but it also made me fragile. Noise could be erased. I stayed away from humans as much as possible, not out of fear for myself, but for them. Prolonged proximity caused migraines, nosebleeds, moments of lost time. I learned to read the signs and move on before harm followed. Isolation was not punishment, it was maintenance. I settled for a time in places that already carried disruption. disruption. Abandoned industrial zones, wind farms, data centers humming endlessly with discarded calculations. My presence blended into the background interference. There, I listened. The sky was not silent. It murmured, not in words or images, but in probability shifts, weather models drifting off course, satellite data producing inexplicable nulls, astronomers arguing quietly over missing fractions of light. The sky was trying to relearn how to observe without me. It was failing. Observation required contrast. Without a focal point, attention scattered and dissolved. Weeks passed, or months. Time no longer behaved consistently around me, so I measured duration by decay, rust spreading, grass reclaiming concrete, hard drives failing one by one in abandoned racks. Then something unexpected happened. People began forgetting the night entirely, not repressing it, not rationalizing it, erasing it. Records vanished. Backup archives corrupted, videos degraded into static, even conspiracy forums lost coherence, threads collapsing into nonsense mid-sentence. The calendar scarred by that year smoothed itself out. New Year celebrations resumed cautiously at first. Then, with growing confidence, fireworks returned in small bursts, then larger ones. The sky did nothing. I watched from a distance as color bloomed harmlessly overhead, each explosion failing to draw attention beyond its brief beauty. For the first time, fear loosened its grip, and that frightened me more than terror ever had. The sky learned through attention. If humanity forgot, the sky would starve unless it found another source. I felt the shift before it manifested, a subtle tightening of probability around places where people vanished without explanation. Remote highways, offshore platforms, research stations where isolation sharpened focus. Rather than dispersing it, the sky was experimenting. Without dates, it hunted intensity. I followed the pattern, staying just outside the disturbance, observing without engaging. Each incident left behind the same residue I carried. Noise. We were becoming common. The realization struck slowly. I was not unique anymore. Others were being pushed out of alignment by proximity to the sky's failed observations, survivors of accidents that should have killed them, witnesses to phenomena that left no record, unfixed people we never met directly. We could not. Too much interference accumulated when we came close, but we sensed one another through absence, through the way systems stuttered, through the way animals reacted. The sky noticed. Its murmurs grew sharper, more focused. Patterns began to form around clusters of noise, collapsing probability back into something trackable. It was adapting again. I understood what had to happen. Noise alone was not enough. It had to disperse. I began moving deliberately through regions of high attention. Tourist hubs, broadcast centers, financial districts, never stopping, never lingering, letting my presence smear itself thinly across countless observers without resolving into focus. Others did the same. I felt them adjusting instinctively, without communication, a migration of errors spreading outward. The effect was immediate. Weather forecasts collapsed, navigation systems drifted, market algorithms stuttered, unable to reconcile contradictory inputs. The sky recoiled. For the first time since I erased myself, it exhibited something like panic, not anger, overload. Its attempts to observe produced only contradiction. Its hunger for focus yielded nothing but interference. I felt myself thinning further, stretched across countless moments without center. This was dangerous. If I dispersed too much, there would be nothing left to maintain coherence, even at this level. But if I did not, the sky would adapt again. I chose dispersion, letting go of the last impulse to remain whole. As I did, the sky's murmurs fractured into incoherent noise. Probability collapsed into harmless randomness. Events lost meaning before they could be noticed. Fireworks burst across the world that night without consequence. The sky watched and saw nothing it could use. I do not know how long I can sustain this state. Perhaps days, perhaps decades, perhaps until the concept of a sky watching humans feels as absurd as gods hiding in thunder. I exist now as a distributed absence, not alive, not gone. As long as attention remains divided, the sky remains blind. And if one day humanity looks up together again, unified in purpose and fear, then perhaps the sky will remember how to see. Until then, I will remain what I became, everywhere, nowhere, and just enough to keep the night quiet. Dispersion is not the same as peace. I learned that as my awareness stretched thinner across the world, being everywhere diluted pain, but it also diluted intention. I existed as faint pressure changes in crowded rooms, as brief system errors blamed on outdated software, as moments when people forgot why they had entered a space. The sky remained blind, but blindness bred instinct. Without clear observation, it began to feel its way through consequences. Storms intensified without clear patterns. Migration routes shifted erratically. Tides arrived minutes early or late, enough to unsettle coastal routines. The sky was learning through impact. I felt the first deliberate counter-move during a solar eclipse. Humanity gathered to look upward together, curiosity outweighing fear. Telescopes aligned, live broadcasts synchronized attention across continents. For a moment, the sky almost remembered. Pressure surged everywhere at once, a gravitational tug toward coherence. I felt myself pulled inward, fragments of awareness snapping toward a central point. Not a date, an event. The sky was rebuilding itself around shared observation. I scattered harder, forcing my presence into noise, flooding the moment with contradiction. Cameras malfunctioned, feeds dropped frames, clouds thickened unexpectedly, obscuring the eclipse for millions. The sky recoiled again, wounded by interference, but it did not retreat. It adapted. From that point on, the sky targeted convergence itself, not celebration, not fear, but curiosity. Moments when humans aligned attention willingly and calmly. Scientific launches failed inexplicably. Global broadcasts suffered cascading errors. Astronomical events clouded over without meteorological cause. Humanity grew frustrated. They blamed incompetence, bad luck, Climate change, anything but the sky. The unfixed learned to read these disturbances like weather. We never met, but we synchronized instinctively, smearing ourselves across moments of high attention, turning clarity into static. Each intervention weakened us further, thinning identity into barely coherent impulse. I could no longer tell where I ended. Sometimes I slipped entirely, losing awareness for stretches that might have been seconds or years. When sensation returned, it did so without memory, only urgency. The sky pressed closer during those gaps. I sensed it hovering just beyond resolution, probing for a stable echo. Each time it found only contradiction, it grew desperate. The sky began collapsing probability locally, forcing order where noise persisted. Entire regions experienced rigid predictability, weather locked into monotony, human behavior flattened into routine. Attention hardened. The sky was starving itself into rigidity. This was worse. Rigid systems broke catastrophically. I understood then that dispersion alone would end in collapse, not safety. A blind sky that forced order would eventually shatter the world to feel something again. I needed to change shape. Once more, I began to regather, not into a center, into a gradient, allowing myself to be more present in places where attention diffused naturally. Markets, parks, ordinary streets where focus slid constantly, less present where attention sharpened. I became a bias, a subtle preference embedded in probability, nudging events toward diffusion rather than convergence. It was exhausting. Every adjustment cost coherence. Words lost meaning. Emotions flattened into vague impressions. Still, the world responded. Broadcast failures decreased. Storms softened. Migration stabilized. The sky hesitated. It could not find a single point to contest. This new equilibrium frightened it. For the first time since Driftwood Point, I felt something unexpected. Grief, not mine. The skies. It had lost the ability to be noticed. Without observers aligned, it could not assert itself meaningfully. Its existence faded into background condition rather than actor. I felt it withdraw, not defeated. Mourning. The unfixed sense did too. Our dispersal eased slightly. Identity fragments reassembled just enough to feel relief. But relief is dangerous. The sky was not gone. It was adapting again, slower now, deeper. I felt its attention turning inward, studying itself in the absence of reflection. A self-observing sky. That thought chilled me. If it learned to generate its own focus, humanity would be irrelevant and interference useless. I followed the sensation to its source. High above the Pacific, satellites recorded a region of anomalous stillness. No clouds, no storms, no atmospheric noise. A perfect mirror. The sky was learning to look at itself. I gathered what remained of me and pushed outward, flooding the region with contradiction. Data corrupted, sensors disagreed violently, models collapsed, the mirror shattered. The sky screamed silently, not in pain, in realization. It It could not observe without something else to look at. It needed us, and that dependence was its weakness. As I dispersed once more, thinner than ever, I understood the final truth. This would not end with destruction. It would end with starvation. As long as humanity never again aligned completely in fear or wonder, the sky would remain blind, and I would remain necessary. I am so tired, but necessity does not care about fatigue. The night above the world is quiet now, but not empty. It is waiting for attention, so I will continue to blur it, for as long as anything remains of me to do so. This is how it ends. Not with fire, not with screams, but with an agreement no one remembers making. Years passed without incident. Or perhaps nothing truly passed at all. Humanity adapted in the quiet way it always does. Large synchronized events faded from culture. Live global broadcasts became rare. Countdown celebrations fragmented into private moments. Local traditions, small gatherings that never aligned perfectly. People said the world had grown tired. They were wrong. The world had learned restraint. The sky remained above it all, vast and indifferent, no longer hunting, no longer testing. It watched clouds drift and storms form and dissolve without interest in meaning, because meaning required attention, and attention had become fractured. I existed less each year. That was deliberate. I let myself thin until I was no longer a presence, but a tendency, a bias toward dispersion embedded in probability itself. When crowds formed, something distracted them. When wonder sharpened, something dulled it. Not sabotage, balance. The unfixed who remained understood without speaking. We did not meet. We did not coordinate. Simply avoided becoming stories. Stories created focus. Focus fed the sky. The sky noticed this change slowly. At first, it mistook restraint for starvation and waited for desperation to drive humanity back into unity. But hunger never came. Life continued. Messy, local, asynchronous. The sky tried once more. On a night with no name, during no celebration, clouds across the planet thinned simultaneously. Not enough to alarm, just enough to invite curiosity. A test? I felt the pull. Weak, uncertain. The sky did not know if it was allowed to look. I dispersed what remained of myself, dissolving into background interference so complete it bordered on absence. Weather shifted subtly. Notifications chimed. People glanced down instead of up. The moment passed. The sky withdrew. Something changed then. The sky did not adapt. It accepted. I felt it release its last grip on relevance. Without shared observation, it could not assert pattern. Without pattern, it could not act. It became what it had always pretended to be. Just sky. No hunger, no faces, no memory of watching. I should have vanished completely after that. I did not. Some errors persist. I remain as a thin residue woven into systems that value randomness. A slight preference for noise over clarity, for difference over unity. I am not aware most of the time. That is mercy. Sometimes awareness returns briefly. A flicker when someone stands alone at night, looks up and feels nothing looking back. In those moments, I know the agreement is holding. Humanity does not look together, and the sky does not look at all. There are consequences without grand moments. History feels flatter, no shared awe, no single point. Everyone remembers, but there are also no faces in the clouds, no calendars that bleed, no nights when fireworks tear holes in the world. Children grow up without learning that the sky can notice them. That ignorance is the price and the gift. If this story is ever told, it will fail. It will fragment. Listeners will forget details, disagree on meaning, lose interest before the end. That is necessary. Stories must not converge. So if you remember this at all, remember it poorly. Do not share it widely. Do not retell it the same way twice. Let it blur, because the sky is still there, and it is still empty. And as long as humanity never looks up together again, it will remain that way. This is how it ends. Not with fire, but with forgetting. The story ends here. Thank you for watching and listening to the whole story. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell to listen to the next stories.